Have you ever wondered how the love and loyalty of an animal can completely transform a family's life? Imagine a father and son, separated by trauma and silence, being reunited by a faithful four-legged friend. Today, we will share the heartwarming story of a war veteran father who found a dog trapped in a snare, unaware that this unexpected encounter would change their lives forever. Stay with us to discover how a simple act of kindness and a look full of understanding can bring forgotten feelings to the surface and heal deep wounds. This is a story of redemption, hope, and the transformative power of animals. Don't miss it. After years of service in the war, a father returned home carrying not only physical scars, but also deep emotional wounds. The pain of losing his wife and the growing distance between him and his only son had turned his life into a routine of silence and isolation. For 8 long years, he did not exchange a single word with his son. Guilt and sadness consumed him, making any attempt at reconciliation difficult. Communication between the two was almost non-existent, and the father felt trapped in a labyrinth of painful memories. One day, while walking through the forest near his home, he found a dog trapped in a snare. Initially, his instinct was to leave it there, as the sight of the trapped animal brought back bitter memories of the war. However, something inside him changed. He saw in the dog the same struggle for survival that he himself had faced. Determined not to let the dog die, he freed it from the snare and took it home. Gradually, he began to care for the animal, which was visibly traumatized. The father saw himself reflected in the dog's eyes and, without realizing it, began to share his days and his stories with his new friend. The father took the dog home, hoping that the animal's presence would bring some relief to the heavy atmosphere in which they lived. However, upon arrival, his son looked at the dog with a distant gaze, void of any will to live. To him, the dog meant nothing more than another distraction in a life that had already lost its meaning. Little did the father know that his son was planning to take his own life. For 2 weeks, he had been contemplating it, finding the barn the perfect place to carry out his plan. He was just waiting for the moment when the despair would become unbearable. The following days were ones of adaptation. The dog, despite the trauma, began to get used to the new home. The father dedicated himself to caring for the animal, finding a sort of therapy in the act of feeding and treating it. The son, however, remained distant. His lost gaze revealed a deep pain and a silent despair. He watched from afar, without getting involved, as the father and the dog began to form a bond. One night, the son decided to put his plans into action and end his life once and for all. He went to the barn to prepare everything. The dog, who had followed him, watched his movements closely and, as if knowing what was about to happen, began to bark, drawing the father's attention from inside the house. Worried, he went to the barn and found his son in a moment of extreme vulnerability, holding a rope. Something in the dog's eyes made him stop and drop the rope, and, sobbing uncontrollably, the son ran back to the house. After the night the dog led the father to the barn and saved his son, the atmosphere at home remained filled with silence and tension. The son showed some signs of shame but still couldn't fully respond, and the idea of ending his life had not left him. A few days later, the dog disappeared. The father, now accustomed to the animal's presence, became deeply worried and began searching for him without success. The son, noticing his father's anguish and understanding that the dog was the only company his father would have left after his departure, decided to help in the search. It would be the last thing he did for his father. Without exchanging a word, father and son began searching for the dog. Winter was at its peak, and the snow was falling rapidly, accompanied by the approaching darkness of night. They moved away from the property, entering the woods in a desperate search. As the snowstorm intensified, father and son found themselves in a clearing. Visibility was almost zero, and the situation was becoming dangerous. It was then that they spotted an abandoned cabin in the distance. They decided to seek shelter there, to wait out the blizzard. Inside the cabin, the silence was broken only by the howling wind outside. Father and son, isolated by the snowstorm, were forced to face each other and their own emotions. After a few minutes of tense silence, the father finally mustered the courage to speak. He began by saying that the last time he had been in a cabin was during the war, where he saw his best friend die in his arms. Reliving this painful memory, he couldn't hold back the tears. It was the first time in many years that he cried, letting all the pain he had kept inside show. The son, seeing his father's vulnerability, was able to see the man he knew before the war, the loving and present father. With a surge of empathy and connection, the son stood up and hugged his father. That simple yet deeply significant gesture made the father feel something he hadn't felt in years. The father realized that the embrace was pulling him back to reality, tearing him away from the traumatic memories of the war. He finally saw that his only son was silently and desperately crying out for help. Crying even more, the father asked for forgiveness for not recognizing the mistakes he made by being cold and distant. Hearing his father's words, the son felt the pain in his heart being replaced by a feeling of security and joy. It was as if that embrace had brought back the father he had almost forgotten. In that cabin, something magical happened, a profound reconciliation that marked the beginning of healing for both of them. When the sun finally appeared on the horizon, father and son realized that the storm had passed. The cabin had served as a refuge not only physically, but also emotionally. They decided to resume the search for the dog, feeling more connected and determined than ever. As they walked through the forest, the sunlight on the snow gave them hope, but time was advancing, and night was beginning to fall again. Worried about their safety, they decided to return home, fearing they might never find the dog. When they arrived home, exhausted and disheartened, they were surprised to see the dog in the room where the father used to sleep with his wife before she passed away. It was a room no one had entered since her death, as the father had begun sleeping in the guest room to avoid the pain of memories. Upon entering the room, father and son saw the dog lying on the double bed, nestled against the deceased wife's pillow. Father and son looked at each other, tears in their eyes, realizing the depth of that moment. The dog, who had disappeared, returned carrying with him a symbol of love and unity. That act represented the presence of the woman who had united the family, and now, in some magical way, she was there again, bringing father and son together. With the dog lying serenely on the bed next to the pillow, it became clear that he had been an instrument for the healing they both needed. They understood that the animal had played an essential role in bringing out the hidden feelings and helping them reconnect as a family. Father and son sat down next to the dog, petting him and feeling the comforting presence of the past. In that moment, they acknowledged that, despite the scars, they could move forward together, rebuilding their relationship and finding strength in each other. In this story, the dog served from beginning to end with a clear and profound purpose: to be an instrument in the life of this family. The reunion with the dog not only solidified the relationship between father and son, but also marked the beginning of a new phase in their lives. They established a new routine, where the dog became a constant presence of love and joy, helping them face daily challenges with renewed hope. Animals have a transformative power in our lives. capable of healing deep wounds and bringing forth the purest and most sincere feelings. They teach us about loyalty, compassion, and above all, the power of silent presence that often speaks more than words can express. Finding hope in the most difficult moments is a challenge, but this family story shows us that even in the most desperate situations, it is possible to find a glimmer of light. And often, that light comes in the form of a four-legged friend, a true gift of divine love.